Hello and welcome to the very first episode of the It's Good to Relate podcast. I am Juma Bannister.
And I am Ayinde Smith.
And today we have a very exciting episode because this is our very first episode. We're not too sure about what's going to happen, but we do have a structure. Hopefully we can stick to it a little bit, entertain, educate, and get people started on a good journey with the very first episode of this podcast.
Yep. This first episode we thought would be good if we could introduce people to us again, let people get to know who we are and our background, and particularly our relationship works and how we use relationship as a way to make our business better.
And with that in mind, we are going to do some interview questions. Ayinde has around 8 questions set there. I don't know what the questions are. He knows what they are, but I'm going to have to answer them and he's going to have to answer them as well. And we're going to see what happens with it. Hopefully the edit will fix all of our mistakes and make this good to listen to.
So we're going to answer these questions cold, meaning I haven't tried to answer them. I have nothing prepared. Juma's hearing these questions for the first time, and I'm probably reading these questions for the second time. So let's go with the first one. The first one is actually kind of easy. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in the creative industry?
Okay, so I am not an anomaly at all. I kind of had a similar process to most people in creative industries in that I liked art growing up and then did well with art in school and wanted to do graphic design as a career when that was still a thing. Many people would argue, but that might not be a thing these days. Many people would argue that. Anyway, I went to John Lee to do it, didn't get into graphic design, ended up in print, and print opened up a whole door into the world of creativity that allowed me to move from print to lithography, to then graphic design, to then web design, to then photography, and all the way here, having this company Relate with Ayinde, where we now do marketing and production stuff. Yeah, and that's how I got to where I am in a nutshell. I mean, I can go more in depth, but I want to give Ayinde a chance to talk about how his process was.
Well, before we go into my process, just a little follow-up question. I mean, we're still feeling out the format for this, but I think it's a good discovery process. So you talked about graphic design. What is it about graphic design that drew you to it?
I was pretty talented in the area of visual things from a very young age. I was into pencil drawings a whole lot. You know, when you find something young that you're good at, if your parents are paying attention, they tend to tell you, hey, continue to do that. And in my household, my father was an artist and he was into arts and he was always this creative type. So it was easy for me to lean into that part of my development. And, you know, I was kind of known in the neighborhood as the small man who would do posters. You know, they used to bring Bristol board, and I used to take a pencil and some marker and make posters for people for their cake sales and for their, you know, it might have a party or something. I used to do all that. And actually my father used to paint banners. We had a big board in this kind of upstairs in the hallway that he used to paint banners on. He used to paint banners for all different sorts of stuff. And sometimes, much to my chagrin, I would get roped in to help paint these banners, and there was paint all over the place until my mother kicked him out of the main house and he had to build a whole art room on its own. So kind of that's how I started off. I was almost destined to be in visual arts and creative stuff. And I guess those are not synonymous, but visual arts is part of the creative industries.
Right. You mentioned your dad. How supportive were your parents in you wanting to get into creative side of things as opposed to more traditional type jobs like teacher or engineer or doctor or something like that?
They were all for it. I think there wasn't even a question as to whether or not that would happen, because even though I kind of did pretty well at CXC and in my family, I was the first person to pass for a 5-year school. My sister then subsequently came and passed for a 7-year school, which made my accomplishment look like nothing. But at the time, it was a big deal. And they felt as if, yeah, okay, I'm talented in this particular thing. This is where I am looking like I'm going. Encourage me in that particular direction. So they were pretty much on board with it. Not that I didn't have doctor or engineer or lawyer potential, but yeah, that would have been a stretch in our current circumstance. Well, back then in our circumstance.
Right. All right.
So what about you, Ayinde? How did you get involved and get started in your creative journey in these creative industries?
Well, the earliest creative endeavors I could remember is back in primary school doing drawings, like you mentioned, doing drawings. Right now, my kids do a lot of those drawings. Remind me of myself just drawing stuff. And when you're young, you just kind of copy stuff you like. Like those our age, not so young anymore, will remember Fido Dido. I remember doing a bunch of Fido Dido drawings, or Fido Dido, as some people might say. There was this bird I used to draw. I can't remember where I saw the original piece from, but I always used to be drawing this bird standing on a stick. It's kind of like stuck in my mind, stuck in my memory. So I always like drawing. I always like art. I went to a primary school in Barataria Anglican. There was no art per se as part of the curriculum. There's nothing like schools are today where, you had art and drama. And I mean, my kids do all these kinds of things at primary school level, but we never had that. We kind of just had to pass common entrance and just kind of focus on that. And even when I did go to secondary school and I went to QRC, we had art, but I didn't really focus in on it. Even when I had to choose my subjects, I didn't focus in on the art. In fact, I wanted to do art as an extra subject. And then that year they decided no more extra subjects after school because the kids are just wasting time. And I said, you know what? No art business, because, you're thinking, how do you feed your family? How do you move up you and your entire family in life? So you don't want to do things that you're not too sure about the thing. But that creative bug has never left me. And if I take a next jump to another significant moment, I remember my mom used to work at the YMCA of Trinidad and Tobago, and they would do all kinds of flyers and different things that they would need for programs and so on. And I remember taking clip art and Word and breaking it up to try and create new flyers and new kinds of graphics so that she can do her flyers and print them out and stick them up and stuff. And so that's where I actually started doing graphic design, similar to you. Once I got into graphic design, I couldn't stop. And then for the program, I would have to say the name Pedro Espinosa, because he was the guy who let the door be
Hold on, Ayinde, wait. Yes, yeah? Brenda. I'm recording the podcast right now.
We need to leave that in.
What's that? The kites? Okay, I'll take down the kites on the cover, darling. No, not a problem. All right. Pull it all the way in.
Good night, Brenda.
Yes. My wife, she didn't interrupt. She came to add to the podcast by asking about taking down some kites. The children have a walkathon tomorrow. By the way, I need some time off Ayinde in the morning to carry my children to a walkathon at the school. Walkathon. Okay. Keep on saying walkathon, like maybe that's what we're going to do, walkathon. Anyway, Pedro.
So I started doing graphic design, being more interested in graphic design. So I decided to do a course, as you're apt to do in Trinidad and Tobago. You do a course in something you're interested in. And a course is basically a short program of intense study. That's for those who don't come from that kind of background. So I went to do this, and the course entailed learning different graphic design programs. So just learning the program, not necessarily learning how to design. So learning Illustrator, at that time, Aula still owned freehand. So it was Aula's freehand, Corel Draw, Illustrator, and learning all the programs. And he had different levels. It was very interesting to me because apart from the programs, he also kind of introduced us. And I'm saying him because Pedro had that impact on me, but he had other teachers. There was a school, and the introduction was to design for business or commercial design. And I really got into that. And then I just took off doing that. And that's where I think it kind of led into photography. I always liked photography. If we kind of speed jump to the next level of my development, photography I would have then been introduced to photography because my mom asked me. Well, she noticed, just like Juma's parents, she noticed my interest in photography. And so I think there was a choice between two gifts. I can't remember what the other option was. It was like a camera or something else. Actually, I forgot the first camera I ever got was a Kodak 110 camera. It was actually a surprise. I think I got it either on my 15th birthday or 16th birthday. 110 film is very small film, very small camera. I actually still have the camera. It would be one of these episodes I'll pull it out and boom, and you see like a Kodak 110 camera for those of us who could remember that far back. But even then, a 110 camera was old technology, but it was my first camera. The point at which I had to choose a camera over something else was a Nikon FM. I remember the Nikon FM. I was buying it used from, I'm trying to remember, I think I did a photography course, and the teacher, I'll remember his name and we'll put it in on the screen at some point in time in post or something like that. And he was selling this Nikon FM camera, and it was this or something else. And it's like, this $1,000 could only spend once. I can't get both things. And I was like, give me the camera. So I got the camera, and that kind of catapulted me to where I am and to where we are, because without that camera, I don't think Juma and I would have been in business together necessarily, or maybe, who knows, maybe doing something else. But that definitely was a catalyst towards bringing us together.
Yeah, I was going to ask you earlier, do you still have any of your drawings from the early days?
I may have one or two, because mommy kept a couple of them in an album, and she may have a couple at home. I'll have to look though. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah. Was that the same Nikon FM that we unceremoniously lost in a tragic incident in 2012?
That's not lost. They stole it. And yes, we are still toting. If you're out there and you stole the Nikon FM camera, we want it back.
Yeah,
that's the same one.
Yeah, you'll go to your grave. Either Jesus had to come back, or you'll go to your grave thinking about that camera. That camera clearly was a sore point, And I used it too as a lovely camera. I remember I took it with me on Tobago to see a potential client, which turned out to be nothing. But I borrowed it, and it was a nice camera, the FM.
Yeah, Nikon FM. And that's also what started us in the Nikon world. Yeah, so I had that as the first camera, and then you just kind of stick with it because you start buying the lenses. And so we still have Nikon up to today. We're actually on Nikons right now. Yeah. I think that's a good segue. You wanted to ask another question?
No, that's it. There was the next question on the list.
All right. So the cameras brought Juma and I together, photography. So I think that's a good segue into the other question we want to kind of approach, which is how did we first meet, or how did we first encounter each other, discover each other, and what led to us working together? Now, I could ask this question directly to Juma because he approached me. So what led to you thinking, okay, I could approach this guy to work with him?
I cannot remember exactly how we first met. I know we run in the same circles. I know that the church that Ayinde goes to and the church that I go to are in the same network, so we would have seen each other around. Yep. But I can't remember exactly how we first met. I want to say that you were doing photography somewhere. I think you know the story better than I do, actually. You might remember more than I do. I do have a bit of the story about what was significant to me was when we actually, you asked me to go into Port of Spain with you. That's a story I will always tell, to do some photography. But it really wasn't to do photography with you, was to be a bodyguard, because you're going to Port of Spain in the nighttime, and I'm a tongue man, and I know my way around town, and you wanted somebody to be there with you. It didn't hurt that I was a big, tall dude. Intimidating looking in Port of Spain to take some pictures for work. I remember that story.
I could see how it could be interpreted like that, but I don't think in my mind it was strictly a bodyguard kind of situation. It was more of a company kind of situation. You're going to do something like this. You don't necessarily want to go on your own, especially at night. So I actually wasn't thinking bodyguard. I was just thinking, I guess, safety in numbers. But yeah, I remember what it was. I could actually see we'll get some of the photos and put them on the screen, because I might be able to put my hand on those photos. Mm-hmm. I was working at an advertising agency, and I can't remember if I was creative director or
account head or something like that.
I might have just been a graphic artist, who knows? But we needed photos. We needed photos for our project. Well, you know how it is with some of these small agencies. No budget to hire a photographer. So of course I was doing photography at the time, and I said, I'll take the photographs. So I need to get photographs of RBTT, Yeah, that in those days it was still RBTT. I needed to get photographs of RBTT of branches. So I took a couple in St. Augustine, and then we came to town to do the main building in Port of Spain. That's what it was. And that's the first time we could say that we worked together. I would have seen you doing photography at other kinds of events before. I must say I was never really impressed because your camera to me.
I've heard this before, people. I'm not shocked.
And this is where the Nikon snub comes in, because at that time I had my Nikon FM, so I was like a real photographer. And Juma had a digital camera, and of course in those early days your digital camera was a little bit janky, a little bit small, and too silver, too shiny. And in my mind, it was like, okay, that's also photography. But in my mind, photography was like this fine art, and you had to take your time, and you had to develop film, and you had to shoot on a proper film camera, and nothing smaller than 35 millimeter. And so I just kind of looked at him and I was like, that's nice. Never thought that a couple of years later I'd ask him to come and work with me. I never actually had no idea that we would actually have a business together.
Yeah.
So maybe, do you remember how we started the business?
I think what happened, let me tell you what happened, right? So I had left my job, left Telios at that time, and I had gone full-time doing photography, and it was mostly wedding photography. And I remember what had happened is that I was playing basketball, and I think I twisted my ankle. And that was like on a Thursday, and there was a wedding in Tobago on the Saturday.
Right.
And I said, you know what? I can't shoot this wedding by myself. I'm not sure how fit I'm going to be. So let me ask Ayinde to come to Tobago with me. And I did ask, and he said yes, and he went, and we shot the wedding together. So that was the first wedding. It was so early in the game that we weren't even doing off-camera flash and fancy stuff like that. It was just like, oh, this is a wedding in Tobago. I have a website. I'm getting clients. Let's just go shoot the wedding. And right. I think that may have been our first foray out in the field together.
Right. Yeah. I remember those days. Also a time of snobbery, because in my mind, wedding photography also was at the bottom of the rung. I was like, this guy wants me to do a wedding. Real photographers don't do weddings. So a little misguided in my youth, but from a good place. Once I started doing weddings with Juma, though, I realized there was a high level of artistry. I think I had that mentality because of the way weddings were traditionally shot.
Yeah.
I understand why they had to shoot them like that, because of cost and the way you develop rules of film, and you had to be very judicious. So you kind of had to plan your shots, and they were very staid and planned and not artistic enough for me. But once I started doing weddings with Juma, and of course by that time we never shot a wedding on film actually, so we were shooting digital. So we had a little more freedom, and I realized how creative you could actually be, how you could actually express yourself through the creation of photographs for somebody, the creation of photographs. So you can be creative and still commercial. I think that's the revelation I got from starting to do weddings with Juma. At that time, we weren't really at studios. At that time, we were Flow Photo Photography, I believe.
Yeah.
So you were Flow Photo Photography. So that's when I first started realizing, hey, you can be creative and express yourself, and you can do it for someone else that pays you. I think before that, I was a little bit like, the artisty type, you have to be pure in the art that you create. And I think I've now been cured of that delusion.
Well, hopefully by now you're cured. You were definitely a purist in the beginning. You looking down upon me like a peasant. First of all, with my digital camera, and then subsequent with my choice of photography. But that all panned out well, because I think at the time, I too was kind of like, weddings has to be more than this. And I found that the industry and how weddings were done in Trinidad and Tobago was quite boring, and it didn't really reflect what capture should be.
Right.
No, these were my internal thoughts, right? I didn't share that with anybody. As a matter of fact, I was a nobody, so nobody would listen to me saying those things. And the people who I encountered, they all were just doing the same thing. I tried many times to connect with people, and they were all just shooting weddings the same way. So I had to kind of look outside of Trinidad and Tobago for inspiration. And that's how I bounced up on the Wedding Photojournalists Association. And so all of the stuff that you saw in the early days was me looking for something that was better than what we currently had. And I found that tribe or that community in the WPJA. I joined up, and that's how the development of the style for Flow Photo, which eventually turned into Relate, got. That's where the foundation came from that documentary creative style of wedding photography, which we both adopted and then grew over a number of years.
Yeah. And you mentioned the documentary style. I think that's one of the things that was a revelation to me, because one of the types of photography, so my interest in photography was very much artistic. And the other big impact for me was National Geographic. I actually used to collect National Geographic magazines. In my mind, the absolute best photographers in the world shoot for National Geographic. Mm-hmm. That's like that kind of photojournalistic style of photography was always, to me, the epitome of photography. So when we started exploring that in terms of doing weddings, it clicked. It said to me, hey, you can explore that side of the art form. And I really feel like sometimes you shoot in weddings, I feel like a documentarian. That's how I feel. I feel like, you know, you're documenting this thing as opposed to taking photographs. You're saving this thing. You're creating a legacy. And that's the approach I think I took. And that's the approach I think I saw you taking. And so I kind of followed your lead in doing that. And
And I felt too that was part of the seed in the foundation of Relate, in that we, apart from the fact that, well, the name is a whole story on its own, which we may get to at some point, but apart from the fact that was part of it, the documentary part, but then it was about what are we doing this for? So people could hold this thing for the rest of their life. It was helping people preserve something for the rest of their life inside of wedding photography. So it was a long-term thing. And the whole idea of building things for the long term has always been in the DNA of Relate. Well, then Flow Photo, soon to be Relate, because I know we transitioned in 2011 when we officially started the new business. And I think we were shooting together since 08 or 09 or something like that. Yeah. I remember. But yeah, so that was part of the thing too. And unfortunately you endured what could have been a rocky start and grew with the company until the company transitioned.
Yeah. I don't think it was anywhere near a rocky start. I think for me, even though I mentioned looking down, that's just by the way, but it was easy for me to get into. And also, in Trinidad, we have a culture of PJs. So even though you have a job, you always have a next job. You always have a next job. You always have a side hustle. So for me, it's like, okay, if my side hustle could be photography, then I'm doing something I like to do and I can still have a job. I didn't know when I started that eventually I'd be like having discussions with Juma about how do we leave that job? And when do you leave that job? So when we started having those kinds of conversations, I was newly married. And so newly married, I think I may have had a baby by then when we started having those conversations. Definitely when I decided
2010. That was 2010?
No, that would have been 2010. So Zuri, well, we're going to cut out Zuri.
So my first daughter.
Yeah, so my first daughter would have been born in 2010, which means she would have been a baby in arms. And we are having this conversation about, hey, how are you going to leave your job? And it was very interesting exploring that. What I will say is that you could plan and you could plan and you could plan. And just like it says in the book, plans of mice and men often go awry. And that's exactly what happened. But I think God was faithful and there was no crash and burn and only sustenance. There was only sustenance coming out. My interesting period of discovering how you move from working full-time, and just interesting process of how you move from working full-time and pursuing your business and your passion part-time, and then having to transition to doing that business full-time. A lot of different things will come up, like how you're going to pay your bills is one that's definitely going to come up. What happens if the business fails? Do you go back to work? Do you go back and take another different kind of 9 to 5? So all of those kinds of thoughts started coming up. Now, luckily for us, we are how many years in and we haven't gotten to that point. And don't know where all this conversation is going.
Thank God we haven't gotten to that point, where may the business continue to be preserved and grow as well. I know we kind of went off on a tangent a little bit down the rabbit hole, but I know we have other questions we need to answer.
Yeah, I think as related studios, we kind of exploring relationship. But we always talk about relationship is paramount to us. In fact, we probably should have started by talking about relationship is more important than photography. And that's something that we always say that's coined by Juma. The next question I think we'll look at is what have been some of the biggest challenges we in this business relationship and how we may or may not have worked to overcome them. So you could probably give one, I'll give one.
Oh, I could give so many, but I will talk about, I'm going to be a little bit selfish and talk about the fact that I had to change a whole lot. I had a particular type of personality, and I had never been in a business partnership with anybody before. And I think one of my major challenges was just my character, like having to change, having to be able to resolve in myself that, yeah, I could see how this business would be built. I could be a visionary. I could lead. And that's not a problem, and that I don't have to know everything. And like resolving some of those things inside of my own mind and my own heart was one of my internal challenges that I had. And even sorting that out through conversation and through the process of discovering where we have to go. Doing all that with a business partner while trying to do work, get clients, and keep the business afloat. It could be a very complicated thing if you think about it too hard. But fortunately, for me, Ayinde is a good fella, and also God knew what he was doing. And so over time, I was changed, I was transformed, and I'm still being transformed to be somebody who could navigate in a way that is accepting of the things I need to adjust in order to get the business where it needs to go, while also considering that it's done in a plurality of leadership, and it's done in a context of collaboration, and allowing for those things to be able to shape how we make decisions and all those different things. And the reason I know that that's important because similar to Ayinde, I had been in different businesses before I got to Relate, and I've seen some good things and I've seen some bad things, and those things have informed where I felt the business needed to go and where it shouldn't go. And I think that's one of my internal personal challenges. I don't want to talk about it on the Relate level, but I felt it was important to say that.
Yeah. I think similar to that, one of the challenges that I would have faced is as a creative person, creative endeavors tend to be individualistic. And it's like when you're an artist, you have an idea of what this thing looks like when it's completed or when you've expressed it. One of the things I had to learn was collaborative creativity. And I think people coming from a creative background, a lot of the people we will be talking to will be coming from creative backgrounds coming into business. And I think anytime you want to transport your creativity into a business scenario, you have to learn to be collaboratively creative. You have to learn to create with other people. You have to learn to allow your creativity to be influenced by others, and also be willing to share your creativity. Because you can have artists can be both arrogant and puffed up, and also very reserved. And so sometimes you have an artist and they're too reserved. They go into a business situation and they just kind of let the environment ride over them. And then you might have an artist that thinks I'm a genius and you have to do what I say, or I'm going to be petty. Yeah. And I think one of the things that is good that we've been able to discover is the way that we could collaborate inside of our creativity and allow each other's creativity to feed into the process, to actually do something more superior, to actually create a better product, to create a better business, and eventually actually make us better businessmen and better artists.
Yeah. And it's true. I mean, one of the things I think, like in preparation for this, is that I kind of formulated a couple of questions that I would have wanted to ask you as well. But riffing off of what you just said, is like when you are an artist or you're in any creative field, whether it's painting, singing, dancing, graphic design, or any of the sort of visual and things that you could do. You do is usually individual, as you said. So I would have possibly started, let me see, I think like 4 different businesses before I ended up on Relate.
Right.
And all those were just me. I tried to do it with somebody a couple times and it failed. But I never wanted to be in business alone. That was never my heart. I never wanted to be in business by myself.
Right.
As a matter of fact, I think to some degree, I didn't want to lead a business. Even though I was starting businesses, I still didn't want to lead them. Mm-hmm. On your side, I would kind of interject. How many business endeavors did you have before you ended up in Relate?
I was actually thinking about this recently. And if we include informal businesses, I probably would have started my first business in Form 4. And what I would have done, so back in the day, there was the Drag Mall on Frederick Street. If you know the Drag Mall on Frederick Street, or where it used to be right now, I can't even remember what is there now. Mostly car park is there now. So the Drag Mall, yeah. So
sorry. I just remembering. Sorry, go ahead. My bad. Not mean to interrupt.
Yeah, so in the Drag Mall, you can buy perfume oil. But the thing is, if you go into the mall, you can buy them in bulk. So around town, it was a thing in the 90s. You would have men selling perfume oil, all kinds of different scents, and it would be like oil in little vials. And you can buy them for $5, $10, $15, $20 kind of thing. And they sold them on the streets. They sold them in City Gate, that kind of thing. And then guys in school bought them. And so everybody bought them. And you put on perfume before you go down the road, that kind of thing. Because of course you're going to all boys school. And when you go down the road, you're going to see girls. So you want to smell a little bit better than when you left. So then I realized, what I realized is that I could go into the Drag Mall, buy bulk Rasta oil, buy the vials empty, go home, parcel them out, and of course make a profit, because then when I come and I sell them, I'm going to make a profit. So I think I did that maybe for a school year or maybe a school term in Form 4. And that might have been like my very first business. And then I remember getting into T-shirts, designing T-shirts for sale, and
that was PBI.
Yeah. And then the last business that before I met you that I was in, I actually had a school teaching teaching Photoshop and other design programs to other people. So I had a school doing that. So I had computers and I would go to teach and that kind of thing. So as I would say, I've always been interested in doing some kind of business, and that might have come from my dad, because he was definitely a PJ man. When you know what we mean by PJ in Trinidad and Tobago, right? Private job. So he worked as a building inspector, but he always had some other additional job to do as a draftsman. So he would draw houses and draw buildings and design houses for people. And so he was always doing a PJ. And I would see, like, when he does a PJ, he would get cash. So like, I never saw his salary, but I always saw this PJ cash. So in my mind, it's like, yeah, business. You kind of have to get into business. And even now, as I'm saying this, I'm not realizing how some of these things influence me into getting into business, and while being still definitely creative, but realizing, okay, business is the thing I want to get into and explore. So yeah, those would have been like the significant business endeavors that would have formulated part of how we developed and how I got to where I got to, having met you.
Yeah. I think all of those things add value and really gave us a platform on which to build this current business for such a long time. And even if we didn't start our own businesses, we were also employed inside of businesses that gave us the opportunity to see how some of these things work. And in particular, I think the last two places I was employed at before going off full-time on my own were very significant. And I would explain why now. That's for another episode maybe. Yeah. But I would just say that was the case. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. What's interesting to me is that Relate Studios, if I count it as a job, it's the longest I've been employed in a single company in my entire life. I actually have worked in numerous places. I can't even remember how many different places. I started working at 14, part-time, of course, at 14. When I did A-levels, I was working part-time. And I never stopped working, literally never stopped working. I have worked every single year since 14 till now. I just worked a number of different businesses. And I've worked in small businesses where it's just one person and it's like, okay, this guy looks a little crazy, doing some crazy stuff here. Big businesses and in between. So very interesting. And I never thought anything was wrong with, it's always like, I will take another job as a progression. The new job would always be a progression. So it never felt like I was changing jobs because I was unstable. I definitely didn't feel like that. I don't know if my mother might have thought that. I definitely didn't feel any kind of instability. It always felt like progression. And the other day I was thinking about it. It's like really, so it's the longest job I've ever had. Yeah, which is good. Not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
I mean, you have a good boss, you know.
Yeah.
By that I mean yourself. Excuse me. What is the next question that we have to go on to?
So we talked about some of the challenges of working together and challenges of relationships inside of business. Maybe we should probably talk about what are some of the factors that contributed to our success as a partnership over the years.
Right. So a couple of things I think are very important when it comes to, I mean, I guess, you know, well, first of all, I'm always very hesitant to use the word success, only because I figure that we are on a journey, and success is not like one point. Success, continuous thing. You continually growing. So I could use the term loosely to define the fact that we've been able to accomplish a set of small goals along the way of a longer journey. I could define it as that. And even when you try to define success at the beginning, you can't, because you don't know where the journey will take you. All you know at the beginning is you want enough money to pay your bills. You know, you don't want to fail. All you know is that you just don't want to fail, right? And in our case, we were also thinking about what was the purpose of this? Why are we here? What's the purpose of this photography company, and why are we here? And so from very early, we were thinking about the deep things of why does the business exist, and what was the real purpose behind having this thing running any way it should.
Right.
And so the thing that I spoke about earlier, the flip side of that, being able to develop in character, also contributed to the success of Relate. Mm-hmm. So me being able to submit myself to a process of transformation, personal transformation, contributed to that. And also having you as a business partner was massive, because it gave me a lot of flexibility to learn. Like, I wasn't always right about everything, and I didn't always approach everything in the best way. But you're not the type of person who will be like, I strike down my tools and walk out the job. You know, you're very tolerant and patient, and you're kind of the antithesis to my personality in some ways. Like, I could be very much like, oh, we want this, let's do it now, let's buy this now, or get this now, or do it. You know, I put my hands in things, and I will want to try it, and I will work. And that's just the way how I develop. I learn things by doing. You are a lot more measured, and you were like, well, why? Or why are we doing this? And so on. So what happened is that there was a dynamic going on that allowed for us to grow in cycles that was safe, were just enough, were just bold enough to grow, but was safe enough to keep the business sustained. Mm-hmm. So we didn't string out ourselves too much and crash, but we also were not stagnant at the same time. So I think that synergy, and I would use this very loose company word, synergy, that synergy of both of us working together really was a big contributor to success. And understanding too, I think a big part of it was understanding too the structure of how the business flowed. As in, we know I'm the leader, but at the same time, it doesn't make me act in a way that is detrimental or oppressive to anybody. As a matter of fact, I've learned to often just shut up and not say anything and listen and see what happens, and even to listen. So over the years, I've learned to do that, to listen more, because I have a tendency to talk a lot. And I think that is something that has changed in me over the years. So there are all little different bits and pieces, and I'm not even talking about, so you realize that I'm not talking about being business savvy or marketing or anything of that sort. All of these things are connected to how you treat the person who you're working with and your character, your development of your character inside of establishing and growing the business. And I guess if you were to talk to business stuff, that could go on for a long time, but I think those are the most important things for me.
Yeah, I think you kind of pointed in a similar direction that I'm thinking. I think one of the things that has made the relationship successful is a commonality of values. And I think those shared values are critical. And people might have heard things like that before, unless you actually work with somebody who either shares those values or don't share those values, it doesn't really hit home. And the worst thing is in a business relationship or any kind of close dependent relationship with somebody who has different values to you. You're always going to end up in problems. And so if anybody's thinking about working together with somebody, that to me, that's the starting point, because I think that's one of the things that really allowed us to be successful. So there would be challenges, but if the point at which we approach those challenges is from a similar platform or similar value stance, then we can be successful in resolving that. And also when you're pursuing certain things, if you want to pursue this thing on this side and I want to pursue this thing on this side with two completely different sets of values, then there are going to be problems. I think definitely that's one of the things that is one of, if not the major factor in our success as business partners.
Yeah. And I love that you ended up with that term, business partners, because I think that people often think that having a business partner is a bad thing. As a matter of fact, there are some people who advocate not having a business partner. And of course, in the world of business, we've seen it go both ways. We've seen people who have had business partners and done extremely well. And we've seen people who have had business partners and it's crashed the business. And in the early days, I think even in recent time, people have approached me and said, well, how do we as business partners make this thing work? And we could probably do an episode on that, on how the dynamics of duality or plurality in leadership, how does it work and how you structure that system in order for it to work. We could probably do an episode on that sometime in the future. Yeah. But I think understanding that it's not just one person who has to put their hands in everything. There are lots of stuff I do not do or I don't have to think about. And that for me is a massive thing. There's some things that Ayinde doesn't have to think about. There's some things that both of us don't think about. All right. And I think building structures where people can focus on the things that are important for the growth and advancement of the business is very, very important for the success of the business as well.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
All right. What's next? My water.
How much longer do you think
we've been talking for 48 minutes.
Yeah, no. Yeah, seeing that. But how much longer do we think we should do the last three questions?
Yeah, do one more and we'll see how it goes. And then we'll close off.
All right. I'm going to do an advice one. So,
okay. Alternatively, we could just talk and we could split it into two. Mm-hmm. If you want to do that.
All right. Okay. So the next question I think we want to tackle is, what advice would you give to others who are looking to build long-lasting and successful business relationships in the creative industry? Now, I know you just mentioned we could probably do an entire podcast. And guys, if you want a podcast on that particular topic, an entire podcast on that, let us know in the comments or send in your comments and we can do that. But just in the time we have now, what advice would you give to somebody who is looking to build long-lasting and successful business relationships, particularly in the creative industry?
So when you're talking about business relationships, are you talking about internally or externally?
I would think, well, you could approach it from both areas, but primarily coming off of our previous question, I would think internally.
Internally. All right. Okay. So if you're talking about somebody, well, first of all, if you have a business partner, you're starting a business, right, it's very important to have somebody that you know is the clear leader inside the business. And how it works is that the site of where the business goes comes from the top and it flows down into all parts of the business. And you establish relationships based on an understanding of the vision of the leader. Now, that's not just the leader coming and telling everybody, do this or do that. It's not a doing thing. It's a site thing. And it's an interesting dynamic because sometimes the leader herself or himself, they don't have all of the answers to the questions that for the things that they're seeing, and they are working it through as well. But being able to communicate and tell the team or tell the persons who are closest to them, this, I'm seeing this thing, and we have to work together to build this thing, right? I don't have all the answers, but that's where you come in. You are somebody who is now co-owner of this particular vision of this thing that we are building. You can now come alongside and help build it. And the closer you are to the leader, or let's just call the leader, the source of the inspiration or the vision or whatever is happening, the more you are able to see the thing and the more you are responsible for helping that thing get built out. And I think understanding that even in a partnership, even in a 50-50 partnership on paper, there has to be somebody who is the primary carrier of the vision of the company or knows the heart of the company or where it goes. And out of that person, out of that singular person, comes a sense of direction of where the business has to go. And then people gather around that. Now, again, it doesn't make the person the how to put it, it doesn't make them infallible, or it doesn't mean that they have all the answers, or they shouldn't act in a way like this is my vision and my thing. The only way it works is if they understand it's not theirs, that it is something that has been given to them to steward, and they are bringing people alongside to build the thing out. And that's why relate is what it is. Even though, and I will repeat, I said this earlier in when we were speaking, I said I didn't really want to have a business for myself. I wanted to always be in business with somebody else. But also to some degree, I didn't want to lead a business kind of way. To some degree, I got over that pretty fast after we started together. But I didn't know how. And I think that for anybody, if they want to be successful and build those proper relationships, right, one of the main things is that people understand where they fit in the structure of how the flow of vision goes. And once they can grab that and understand that they are an owner and they're coming alongside to build this one singular thing, if everybody has the same sight of this thing and everybody wants to build a singular thing, and then it becomes much easier for the business to move forward, because with people, with alignment comes momentum. Yeah. And once you have that, then you're able to build and move stuff.
Yeah. Very interesting that you talked about the singular leader. So I teach a class from time to time, and I actually say that exact same thing. So in talking about how a business develop plans and develop marketing plans in particular, I always start like at the very, very beginning, which is the vision. And one of the things I always say is exactly what you said. The vision can only come from a single person. There's no vision by committee. There's no vision by management team. There's no vision by consensus. A vision literally has to come from one person, because anytime you add two people to the vision, you now have division or diversion. And so I agree with that completely. And I think people kind of get caught up with who's the boss. And so people go into situations and they're always concerned with who's the boss. And I think in a business like ours, it's good that we don't have to worry about that kind of thing, because there's no boss. Nobody's coming to rough you up. Nobody's coming to tell you what to do. Nobody's coming to drive you like a slave master. Is that kind of dynamic just doesn't exist in relationship. But there definitely is visionary lead, and that's one of the things I agree that every business should have. You must be clear who the visionary lead is, and the visionary leader must be clear that that's their role and their job. And the way I put it is that their job is to ensure that everybody catches the vision. Their job is to ensure that everybody lay holds or apprehends or comes into a full understanding of what the vision is. And then inside of what you're doing, you then pursue that, so that you don't have people building kingdoms inside of the kingdom, because you don't want that to happen. If I had to think about the piece of advice that I could give to people, I would think the word flexibility comes to mind. I think when you are working with other people, you have to learn to be flexible. If you're inflexible, if you're rigid, immovable, things will be a lot more difficult and you will see a lot less success on teams. And I think if you pursue that side of yourself, so even if you think I'm so inflexible, I think if you approach it from, okay, well, let me learn more about myself and let me teach myself how to be something different, you will actually grow as a person. And as you grow, your relationship with that business partner will grow and that business will actually grow. So that was one piece of advice. I mean, we probably have a bunch of other things that we could probably say, but I think those two things are actually pretty spot on for people thinking about working with somebody else in a business. And we'll probably do a whole podcast on team building and team management.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's as you said, spot on to your spot on, Ayinde. That is exactly right. So thanks everyone for joining us, and see you next time on the It's Good to Relate podcast. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.